From the very first moment she saw him step out of that sleek black car, the one that gleamed like polished obsidian under the evening sun, Maya felt something stir inside her chest, something bold, something dangerous, something she wasn't ready to name. His clothes, perfectly fitted and impossibly clean, looked like they belonged to someone who had never known what it felt like to check price tags or wait for discounts. His hair was the kind that cost money to maintain, the kind that made people look twice in that single second. Before she even knew his name, Maya felt as if fate had tilted, just slightly, pulling her toward a story she didn't yet understand. And little did she know, this story would challenge everything she thought she understood about wealth, dignity, love, and the truth that hides in quiet, ordinary hearts. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that reveal the beauty in unexpected places, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Maya had always been the kind of girl who noticed details, creases in someone's clothes, the way their shoes were polished, the quiet confidence in their steps. She grew up in a small apartment above her mother's tailor shop, where she learned early that people's appearances could tell stories, long before their mouths did. So when she met Adrian that evening, outside the art gallery where she worked part-time, everything about him screamed of money, and not new money, the old, quiet kind that didn't need to brag. When he smiled at her, something inside her bloomed, like a shy flower leaning toward the sun. She didn't mean to assume anything about him, but the curated world she'd always admired seemed to sit perfectly on his shoulders. At first, Maya told herself she wasn't drawn to him because he looked rich. She told herself it was his warmth, his curiosity, his soft-spoken manner. But a small, uncomfortable part of her whispered that wealth meant stability, freedom, choices she'd never had, and for once in her life, she wanted to believe she deserved someone who could lift her out of the narrow, dusty corner she had grown up in. Adrian visited the gallery 3 times that week. He lingered near her desk, asked about the artist, asked about her. He wasn't flashy, but there was a calm refinement in the way he listened, the way he carried himself, as though he knew he belonged in places like this. Days turned into weeks, and Maya's world slowly shifted. They went for coffees in beautiful cafes she had only seen in magazines. They took walks in neighborhoods where the roads were clean and lined with identical trees that looked like they had been budgeted, planned, and arranged by someone with impeccable taste. When she went home after seeing him, her small apartment felt even smaller, the peeling wall more noticeable, the sounds of her mother's sewing machine louder and more desperate. But instead of embarrassment, she felt hope that one day she wouldn't have to hear the machine at all, that she could give her mother rest, that she could breathe in a life that smelled less of sacrifice and more of possibility. She wasn't gold digging. She wasn't after luxury. She was after a future that didn't terrify her. But the truth was coming, and it wasn't the truth she had imagined. One chilly morning, after Adrian had canceled their plans because of some urgent errands, Maya decided to surprise him. She convinced herself it was harmless, sweet even. She bought a small box of pastries and took a bus to the address he had once casually mentioned. She imagined a tall apartment building with mirrored elevators, or perhaps a quiet gated home with trimmed hedges. But when she reached the place, she stopped in her tracks. The building didn't look like any place Adrian would live. It was older than her own home, with rust curling around the edges of the windows and a staircase that sagged from years of footsteps. The hallways smelled of damp wood, and the light bulbs flickered as if tired of trying. For a long moment, she simply stood there, gripping the pastry box so tightly her knuckles whitened. Maybe this wasn't the right address. Maybe she had misunderstood. But then she saw him, Adrian, wearing a simple, slightly faded shirt she had never seen before. His hair was not styled like usual, and his hands carried 2 large sacks of laundry. He froze as soon as he saw her, his eyes widening with something like fear and shame. Maya felt the world tilt again, this time sharply, painfully. Adrian pulled her aside, his face pale, his voice trembling as he tried to explain. He didn't own that sleek black car. He borrowed it from the garage where he worked part-time detailing luxury vehicles. The expensive-looking clothes he wore on their dates were second-hand pieces he carefully picked from thrift stores, choosing the ones that looked high-end. The cafes he took her to were places where he used employee discounts or saved for days just to afford a single drink. And the truth he had buried the deepest was that he lived alone in that tiny apartment because he had no family left and no stable income except for odd jobs he pieced together. Maya listened, her heart cracking louder with every word. Not because he was poor, but because he hadn't trusted her with the truth. She felt foolish, exposed, and angry not at his poverty but at her own assumption, her own longing for an easier life, her own belief that wealth meant safety. She walked away without saying much. The pastry she had bought slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground, forgotten. The next days were heavy. Maya couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, but beneath that, something softer stirred: understanding, compassion, even guilt. She realized she had built a fantasy around him, a story that only existed in her mind. But the real Adrian, the one who worked 2 jobs, who lived humbly, who carried responsibility with quiet dignity, was someone she didn't fully know yet. At the gallery, she moved through her shifts like a ghost. Even her mother noticed the heaviness in her steps, the way she stayed quiet during dinner. One night, as she folded fabrics beside her mother, Maya whispered, "Emmy, do you think people lie because they're bad or because they're afraid?" Her mother looked at her with tired but wise eyes and said, "People lie when they think the truth will cost them something precious." The word stayed with Maya like a light in a dark hallway. A week passed before she decided to see him again, not because she had forgiven him completely, but because her heart refused to let the story end with bitterness. She found him outside the garage where he worked, sitting alone on the curb, staring at his hands. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes filled with something raw, part hope, part pain, part apology. Maya sat beside him. No dramatic speeches, no accusations. Just 2 people side by side, their breaths forming clouds in the cool evening air. She realized he hadn't pretended to impress her. In a selfish way, he had pretended because he felt too small to stand beside her. He was terrified she would reject him before she even knew him. And while his lies hurt, his vulnerability softened something inside her. They talked long into the night about fear, about pride, about the insecurities that wrap around people like invisible chains. She confessed her own shame, how she had assumed his wealth meant she could finally escape her difficult life. Adrian admitted he had never felt enough for anyone. Slowly, painfully, they began again, not as fantasy versions of themselves, but as real people with real flaws and real hearts. The days that followed weren't magical. They were messy, honest, sometimes awkward. They learned each other all over again, this time without masks. Maya found beauty in the ordinary moments, sharing cheap street food, taking long walks, sitting on the rooftop of Adrian's building, watching the stars that for once didn't feel so far from reach. She discovered parts of him she never noticed before: the way he talked passionately about restoring old cars, the quiet way he helped his elderly neighbors, the gentle patience in his hands. And Adrian began to see Maya beyond the gallery lights and pretty dresses. He saw the girl who stayed up late helping her mother, the girl who saved every penny for her college classes, the girl who dreamed of curating art, not because of status, but because she believed every story deserved a place. Their bond didn't grow from luxury, it grew from truth. Months later, on an evening warmer than any before, they stood on that same rooftop where they often talked. Maya looked at Adrian, not as the man she thought was rich, but as the man who taught her something far more valuable. That real wealth lived in honesty, resilience, humility, and the courage to love without guarantees. If this story touched your heart, even a little, please like, comment, and share. Your support helps us bring more emotional and inspiring stories to the world. Before the ending, here's a small request. Comment below what matters more to you, how someone appears or who they truly are. And as the night breeze wrapped around them, Maya felt something she had never felt before. Not the excitement of fantasy, not the thrill of expensive dreams, but a deep, steady peace. She held Adrian's hand, knowing the truth now. And for the first time, the truth was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.